My name is Diana, and I am 32 years old. I run operations for a restaurant group that seats over 3,000 people a week across 4 different locations, which means I know exactly how a check moves from the kitchen to the table. I know the rhythm of a dining room the way most people know how to tie their shoes. So when my parents called me after 3 years of total silence and invited me to dinner to make amends, I really should have asked one simple question before I said yes. Who is actually going to be sitting at that table? I didn't ask. Instead, I drove 40 minutes to an expensive restaurant called the Belvedere, walked through the heavy front doors, and found 16 members of my extended family already seated around a massive table covered in lobster tails, Wagyu steaks, and a $400 bottle of Bordeaux that they had started pouring before I even pulled into the parking lot. My father looked up from the head of the table, smiled a perfectly rehearsed smile, and demanded what I had spent my entire life earning. He said, "You're paying, right? You owe us that much." He fully believed he had cornered me in front of an audience. What he hadn't counted on were the 2 quiet sentences I was about to whisper to our waiter, or the devastating truth that his own credit card was about to announce to the entire family just 15 minutes later. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, the channel where ordinary people face impossible toxic family moments and walk out with their peace and their dignity completely intact. If you have ever been the one expected to pay for everything, fix everyone's mistakes, and stay quiet in your own family, this story is specifically for you. Before I tell you exactly how I handled this trap, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one of those comments, and it helps the channel so much. Let me take you back a few weeks before that dinner, before I saw that parking lot full of cars I recognized, and before my father tried to hand me a dinner bill the size of a mortgage payment. I need to tell you exactly who I was before this happened, because that exhausted, compliant version of me was the exact person they were counting on to show up. And it was a version of myself I had already stopped being. To understand how a dinner bill can be weaponized, we have to talk about the concept of the family fixer. I manage 4 high-volume restaurants today, but I didn't start there. I built my life from the absolute bottom, starting as a busgirl at a steakhouse in Knoxville when I was 17. I used to ride the school bus smelling like fryer oil. I worked my way up to hostess at 19, server at 21, floor manager by 24, and finally a regional operations director by the time I turned 30. I am not wildly wealthy, but I own a 2-bedroom condo that is entirely paid off. I have a retirement account that I never touch, and I still drive a reliable 9-year-old Honda. My only real luxury in life is ordering sparkling water when I eat out. When you grow up constantly paying for everyone else's expensive steaks, you learn very quickly to keep your own tab small enough so that you can always walk away. I had been my family's designated fixer since I was a teenager. My very first paychecks went to buying the household groceries. My tax refunds went to paying for my mother's dental work. And when my dad's truck transmission blew out, I paid for the entire rebuild and lied to him, saying it was covered under warranty, because I knew his pride wouldn't let him accept a handout from his 22-year-old daughter. When my younger sister Brooke got married, I quietly covered the florist, the photographer, and half the reception costs. I did all of this while smiling through my mother's toast about raising 2 strong girls, knowing full well that only one of us was footing the bill. This brings me to the first crucial lesson about setting boundaries with people who use you. I didn't pay for all these things because I was overly generous. I did it because I learned around age 15 that the fastest, easiest way to keep the peace in my family was to ensure nobody ever had to ask me twice. Ask once, Diana pays, everyone is happy, and the dinner table stays quiet. I trained them to treat me this way. I actively taught my parents that my wallet was a vending machine. They just had to insert guilt, and they would receive a check. The breaking point finally happened 3 years ago. My sister Brooke decided she wanted to open a trendy cafe. She had no business plan, no market study, and had never managed so much as a lemonade stand, but she needed a $75,000 small business loan and the bank required a co-signer. Naturally, they expected that co-signer to be me. My mother called me on a Sunday, with my dad sitting right beside her, and told me to just sign the papers because Brooks Cafe was her dream. When I asked to see her projected margins, lease terms, and supplier contracts, my mother's voice went completely flat. She told me that I didn't need a spreadsheet to love my sister. I said no. I didn't say no because I didn't love Brooke, but because I had spent enough years in the brutal restaurant industry, watching people pour their life savings into concepts with zero foundation. And I knew exactly what $75,000 of someone else's debt feels like at 3 in the morning when the business fails and the loan is still due. My father stood up, pointed at the door, and delivered the sentence that closed our relationship for 3 years. If you won't help this family, you're not part of it. The next morning, I was removed from the family group chat. For 1,000 days, I was the villainous daughter who loved money more than her own sister. When the vending machine finally said out of order, they didn't try to fix it. They just unplugged it and walked away. The silence nearly broke me, but it also forced me to heal. Now, fast forward 3 years to a seemingly normal Tuesday morning in my office. I was reviewing a vendor contract for imported olive oil when my phone buzzed. I glanced down and felt something ice-cold settle behind my ribs. It was a notification that I had been added back to the family group chat. The chat history was wiped clean, and my mother had sent a warm, incredibly careful, almost rehearsed message. She wrote that she and Dad had been doing a lot of reflecting and wanted to invite me to dinner at the Belvedere restaurant to start healing as a family. She explicitly promised it would be just the 4 of us. Then, 30 seconds later, she sent the line that should have warned me of everything to come. Family takes care of family, and sweetheart. It's time we remembered that. If you are listening to this right now and you have toxic relatives, you need to understand how manipulation is packaged. When a family member cuts you off for years and suddenly returns with passive voice statements about healing, while completely avoiding any actual apology or taking responsibility for their actions, they are not looking for closure. They are looking for an opening. My coworker Jess, who had never even met my family, told me that this invitation had ambush written all over it. My sous chef Marco told me the exact same thing, but I decided to go anyway. I didn't go because I believed them or expected a real apology. I went because I needed to sit across from them and find out if 3 years of silence had changed anything, or if it was just a longer version of the same old conversation where I was expected to listen, agree, and pay. I set one strict rule for myself, wrote it on a sticky note, and pressed it to my steering wheel. One dinner, civil, no money, and if it felt wrong, I'd leave before dessert. I dressed simply on purpose, wearing black slacks and a gray blouse, because I knew my family already believed I flaunted my success. The drive took 40 agonizing minutes, and by the time I reached the highway merge, my stomach was tightening with that familiar dread. The Belvedere sat at the end of a landscaped strip of high-end shops. It was the kind of restaurant where the hostesses wear all black, and the entrees start at $42 before you even get to look at a menu. When I pulled into the parking lot, the trap instantly revealed itself. I saw my dad's truck in the 3rd row and my mom's sedan next to it. But then I saw my Aunt Linda's white Buick, my Uncle Greg's SUV, and Brooke's hatchback with a bumper sticker from her cafe, the cafe that had closed 11 months after it opened. I counted 9 vehicles in total. My mother had explicitly promised, just the 4 of us. I sat in my car for 2 full minutes staring at my sticky note, knowing the smart thing to do was to reverse out of the lot, drive home, and eat leftover soup. But I got out, locked my car, and walked toward the entrance, because I had spent 3 years learning not to run, and I wasn't going to start running again now. Inside, the lobby smelled like rosemary, warm bread, and expensive taste. The hostess led me toward the back of the dining room, and as we walked, she leaned in and quietly told me something critical. Your father put a card down to hold the reservation, just so you know. I've filed that operational detail away permanently. My father had secured the table, but I already knew deeply in my gut that the final bill was never supposed to land on his card. I turned the corner into a private dining alcove and saw 16 chairs. Every single one filled except the empty one at the far end, waiting for me. The table was staggering. There were massive platters of lobster tails fanned across crushed ice, tiered stands of Wagyu sliders, a giant charcuterie board, and a $400 bottle of Grand Cru Bordeaux that was already half empty. They had been there for a while and they had been ordering hard. My mother stood up with her arms open, beaming at me. The table actually broke into applause. My uncle whistled, and my sister Brooke raised her wine glass with a smile that had plenty of teeth, but absolutely no warmth. I sat down because that is what 15 years of front-of-house restaurant training gives you, the ability to smile pleasantly while your brain runs a high-speed threat assessment. My mother waved her hand dismissively and claimed the guest list just grew, telling me, "You know how family is." I scanned the table and saw cousins I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, aunts, uncles, and even a neighbor I had never met. Then my mother leaned across the table, squeezed my hand, and repeated the trigger phrase, "See, family takes care of family." This brings me to the next phase of setting a boundary, observing the performance without participating in it. My father is a man who orders for the table rather than asking. He waved our young waiter Nathan over and loudly ordered another round of lobster tails, 2 more Wagyu plates, and another expensive bottle of Bordeaux, making sure to announce to the room to bring the good one. He pulled his credit card from his wallet, held it up like a magician showing a coin before a trick, and told the waiter to put it all on his card because they were celebrating. But I knew my father. He was a man who normally argued over the price of a muffler and returned shirts if the sale tag was missing. He did not casually buy $400 bottles of wine. I looked at the dent in his truck out in the parking lot that he had never fixed, and I looked at my mother's Coach purse sitting on the chair beside her with a cracked strap held together by a literal safety pin. They were putting on an elaborate performance of financial solvency, and I was their sole audience member. By the time the second bottle of wine was poured, the passive-aggressive comments began. My Aunt Linda laughed and said it must be nice running fancy restaurants while the rest of them clipped coupons. My cousin Megan asked if I ever felt guilty living so well while my parents were going through a rough patch that nobody had ever told me about. Brooke didn't even look up from her phone when she chimed in, stating that I wouldn't know because I hadn't been around. They had aligned their story perfectly before I ever walked in. The narrative was set. Diana left. Diana has plenty of money, and Diana owes us. Aunt Linda reached across the table, took my hand, and delivered the ultimate guilt trip, saying, "Family doesn't keep score, dear." I gently pulled my hand back, picked up the single glass of sparkling water I had ordered, and said absolutely nothing. About 40 minutes into this endurance test, I excused myself to the restroom to get 2 minutes of silence. And that is where the truth, literally, fell into my lap. Sitting on the edge of the marble countertop was a phone covered in daisy stickers. It was my sister Brooke's phone, and she had left the screen lit up. At the top of the screen was a notification banner for a group chat I had never been added to, titled Dinner Plan. The preview text was from my mother, and it read, "Don't tell Diana it's everyone. She won't dare." I am not the kind of person who snoops, but I picked up that phone like I was picking up a vendor invoice that didn't add up. I opened the chat and scrolled up through 3 weeks of coordinated deception. My mother wrote, "Once she's there with the whole family watching, she won't dare say no. She never could handle a scene." My dad replied, "Just make sure she sits at my end. I'll handle the ask." Brooke had chimed in with, "Order the good stuff before she gets there. Once it's on the table, she can't exactly send it back LOL." But the most chilling messages were the financial ones. My mother had texted, "The bank called again Thursday. We need to figure out something before June. Diana can cover us through spring. She's got more than enough." And finally, the message that permanently severed my guilt. "It's not asking for money. It's letting her back into the family. She should be grateful we're even giving her this chance." They wanted me to feel grateful. They wanted me to thank them for the privilege of being tricked into an expensive 16-person dinner so that I could pay a massive bill I didn't order to solve a financial crisis nobody had disclosed. for a family that had completely cut me off when I said no the last time. I set Brooke's phone down, washed my hands, looked at myself in the mirror, and felt an incredible, overwhelming sense of calm. For the first time in 15 years, I knew with absolute certainty that I was not going to pay the toll they demanded. When I walked back toward the dining room, I didn't return to the table right away. I walked straight to the service station at the back of the restaurant, where our young waiter Nathan and a floor manager named David were reviewing tickets. I approached them using my professional restaurant voice, low, calm, and completely unreadable. I looked at David and delivered the 2 sentences that dismantled my family's entire trap. I'm not the host, and I won't be covering this table tonight. Please bring the full check to the gentleman at the head of the table, the one whose card is already on file for the reservation. David read the situation immediately. He knew exactly what a financial redirect looked like. He simply nodded and said, "Done." Then I added my second request: split just my sparkling water onto a separate check, and add 30% to mine for your team. You've earned it tonight. I paid for my water right there at the service station, taking myself completely off their tab. David assured me he would present the main check to the table in about 10 minutes, right after the dessert course cleared. I walked back to the table, sat down, and took a slow sip of my water. The meal was entirely over in every way that mattered. The food was eaten, the expensive wine was gone, the unspoken demand had been made, and my answer had already been delivered to the management in a language my family didn't speak. I sat there and watched them run up the tab even further. My aunt ordered creme brulee without glancing at the price, and Brooke ordered a complicated chocolate soufflé. They were gorging themselves on the assumption that my credit limit was endless. Brooke, emboldened by 3 glasses of wine, grinned at me across the table and slurred, "Relax, big sister, it's just dinner, you can afford it." I asked her what exactly I was supposed to afford, and she gestured lazily at the ruined platters and empty bottles, saying, "We ordered the good stuff since you're treating." She said it casually, confirming out loud what every single person in that room already knew. I was the mark, and this dinner was a coordinated heist. When dessert finally cleared, the moment of truth arrived. Nathan walked into the alcove, holding the leather-bound check presenter. He didn't walk to the center of the table, and he didn't walk toward me. He placed it directly in front of Raymond Mayfield, my father, the man who had confidently told them to put it all on this 2 hours earlier. The conversation at the table died instantly. I watched my father process the error in his plan. My mother's eyes went wide with panic as her composure finally cracked. But my dad, relying on 63 years of pride, tried to recover. He picked up the folio, handed his credit card to Nathan without even looking at the staggering total, and loudly reminded the room that they were celebrating. Nathan took the card gently and walked away. 4 minutes later, Nathan returned. He leaned down beside my father's chair and spoke softly, but the room was so dead silent that every single person heard him. "I'm sorry, sir. The card has been declined." My father's fake smile vanished. He demanded Nathan run it again. 2 minutes later, Nathan returned with the same news. My dad frantically pulled a second card from his wallet, then a third. He handed them over like a desperate gambler. A few minutes later, Nathan came back a final time. He didn't even need to speak. His face said it all. My father looked at me, his face raw and completely unguarded. He looked at me the way a drowning man looks at a lifeboat that is actively pulling away. His chair scraped against the hardwood, and his voice shook as he asked me what I did. I picked up my glass of sparkling water, took a sip, set it down, and said, "I didn't do anything, Dad. Your card was declined. That's between you and your bank." He stammered. "You were supposed to," but stopped himself. He couldn't finish the sentence out loud in front of the restaurant. My mother immediately launched into performative, theatrical crying, gasping and sobbing to recruit sympathy. She wailed about everything she had supposedly done for me, trying to paint me as an ungrateful monster. I kept my voice perfectly level. I didn't lean forward. I didn't yell. I asked her, in front of the entire family, "Tell me, what did you do for me in the last 3 years?" Brooke slammed her hand on the table, accusing me of making everything about myself. Aunt Linda grabbed my arm, begging me to just pay because my father was embarrassed. I looked at her and gave her a single word: no. Then my father broke. His voice dropped, and for one terrible, honest moment, the performance ended. "Diana, please," he whispered. "We're drowning." I looked at the scared man behind the bravado, the father who had lost his business and his pride, and I truly ached for him. But then he ruined it by adding, "And you'd let us." Even while drowning, he was still reaching for my wallet instead of my hand. I stood up. I told him that I was genuinely sorry they were struggling, but that this entire dinner was not a request for help. It was a trap. I told them that if they wanted real structural help, I would gladly sit down with them and a financial counselor to build a plan, with no tricks, no audience, and absolutely no $4,000 lobster. But I was not paying this bill. My mother sobbed that they just wanted me back. I looked at her and quoted her own text message from Brooke's phone. "You wanted me back for what I could cover. You said I could cover you through spring." The entire table went ghost white. My mother's hand flew to her mouth and my dad stared at the tablecloth. I picked up my purse. I looked at my mother one last time and delivered the final boundary of my life. "You always told me family takes care of family. So why was I the only one who ever did?" I turned around and walked out of the restaurant. I walked past the hostess and through the heavy glass doors into the warm evening air. I sat in my reliable Honda, pulled out my phone, and opened the family group chat. The messages were already flooding in from my mother, Brooke, and aunts. A cascade of fury and accusations from people who had finally been caught. I didn't read a single one of them. I scrolled to the bottom, tapped leave group, and drove home in a silence that was finally, peacefully, mine. In the aftermath, I learned the full truth. My dad's contracting business had folded 18 months prior due to bad bets on commercial projects. My mom had maxed out a home equity line to cover minimums on 4 credit cards. Their house went on the market that July, and they were forced to move to a smaller rental. It was devastating, but it was the consequence of choices they had made long before I walked into that restaurant, and none of it was mine to fix. I kept my promise. 6 weeks later, I called my dad and offered to sit with him and a financial counselor. He hung up on me. "I haven't called again, but the offer still stands. Here is the greatest value I can leave you with today. I learned that the most expensive thing you can ever buy is other people's comfort with your own silence." The night I stopped paying for their comfort was the night I finally became rich in the ways that actually matter. If you have ever been treated as the family bank, please hear me. Helping is a choice, not a debt you owe for existing. A boundary does not have to be loud to be unbreakable. It can be as quiet as a glass of sparkling water and a single conversation with a restaurant manager. If this story resonated with you, please share this video with someone who desperately needs to hear it today. Drop a comment below and tell me if you've ever had to cut off a financial drain in your family. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.